Yes.
All right. Oh, Mr. Kuzman is here.
Oh, left it out. He
Yeah,
went
but
to
you're-
work straight.
All right, we'll open it for any public comment on non-agendized items. No, seeing none, we'll move on to the number 4, which is discussion and recommendations to the board regarding the findings and recommendations of the Grievance Committee and the report submitted on January 2 at our regular meeting. I sent out to the board I guess you would call it a preliminary review of this. What did I call it in my email? Preliminary review and comment on the remaining grievances. And as I said, this is a starting point, not an ending point, but I thought it would be useful to have at least a structure to this so that we can go through and deal with this item by item.
Do you have an extra copy?
I do, they're on the table,
Great, thanks.
as well as the grievance committee's report.
You saw that, Mr. Kuzman, already, right?
What's that?
The grievance.
Yes, I did.
So, the first thing, as far as discussion on this, is we go through here, and there's about 3 pages, I think, or 4 pages of 3 pages of recommendations. Rather than starting with taking them one at a time. The first thing I think we need to discuss is those items that the grievance committee chose to discuss and make a recommendation on, wherein those items had already been denied in the previous letter. And it's my feeling that given that those denials were based on advice of counsel from the city attorney, who is our counsel of record, that the grievance committee did not have jurisdiction or authority to modify or to overturn or in any way comment on those sections that we have denied. Any discussion on that, the committee members?
I completely wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, we can't go against council's recommendation.
I'm going to take the contrary opinion here. I think that's, we're not, these are findings and recommendations. I think that they're recommendations from a panel of stakeholders to hear. So they've made us recommendations. We can do with them what we want. We can throw the whole report out, or we can refuse even to hear it, as is currently going on in Arleta, I understand, where they have a grievance panel report that the board is just simply refusing to hear. So I think that, rather than making this into a legalistic issue of, what the panel was allowed to hear, what they weren't allowed to hear, I think we should take their findings and recommendations at face value and look at them with a view to if there's anything we can glean from any of these that might help us in the future, we should take that away. That's kind of my approach. This is
Well, my approach is, if I could speak, that if we go against our council's recommendations, who then has a strong recommendation? Our council, who is the city who we're under, whose authority we are under, or do we take layman's stakeholders' findings, in which I'm sure they did not know everything. Plus that, they used one of Mr. Kuzman's recommendations when they didn't come to us and say, who would we like on the stakeholders? We weren't given that option. That, to me, is very egregious.
I don't want to talk about process at this meeting. We're through process. I simply want to discuss the specific findings and whether or not we're going to make a recommendation, and if so, what that recommendation should be. At this point, the process is over. It's in our hands as a board to do this. The reason I made the motion to give it to the executive committee because I felt if the board could spend an entire meeting on this, or 2 meetings. And I think it's the duty of the executive committee to provide some guidance here. So that's what I want to do, is provide guidance and recommendations to the board.
Oh, sorry, Brian.
No, go ahead.
I think it's pretty clear, in addition to, the amount of time that we have to dedicate toward this, efficiency, I think, is really key. You know, like you said, it could easily be 2 or 3 meetings worth, of the board. And on advice of council, which they know the rules or charter in and out, the city attorney has indicated those items are not within the grievance panel's purview. I think it's pretty clear. Now, with those two, and those are my rationale for why I would wholeheartedly say let's move past those and look at the other ones that the city attorney hasn't just said, no, it's not within our jurisdiction, let's go and look at the ones that actually are. I think we better be suited over time to do that.
Let's do this then. There are probably a half a dozen, maybe more, that I made the observation and the comment that, you know, this had already been denied on advice of the council, or that the grievance panel had no authority. When we get to that, Anthony, if you think there's something that the grievance panel needs, you know, that should be discussed with that, bring it up, and, you know, we can talk about it. But, again, it's my feeling that if the city attorney put a goodly amount of time in going through this, and, you know, separating the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. So, I want to defer to the city attorney, to the extent that we need to defer, which I think is probably, you know, I guess it puts us in the position of saying, no, we don't want to listen to our legal counsel. I don't want to do it.
Yeah, no. This is a matter that's been reviewed by the city attorney's office, city Los Angeles, who are in fact our council of record, and the rest who said that and they recommended is just opening the door to a vast amount of issues that I would prefer not to. They've made it, you know, they've given us their advice on these positions. I would totally support the points you just made. There's plenty of things in here that we can talk about. I would say let's move on and get to those.
All right.
And see what we could actually address within our purview, so to speak.
Okay, let's go to the third page then of the grievance committee report.
Can I just say one more thing
Yes,
about that?
sure.
Mr. Bora said in his, you know, when he presented the report, that he was not aware that the source of our letter to Mr. Cusman was the city attorney, but it says right in the first line that it was, and I specifically know I told him that. So how he said that or why he said that, I don't think that's bad. They're covering everything,
He's
but.
not trying, nitpicking that it wasn't a letterhead.
But you know, I mean, you know, so I could, you know, if I was a lawyer, I could argue this one either way. But I think we're right in the approach. We've got a lot of stuff to cover, and my belief is that one good sweep will do most of the stuff, even if we don't get all the bits of dust in the corner.
All right, so let's go to the number one. The recommendation from the committee is, from the grievance committee, is to enforce outreach and agenda posting guidelines, ensure all stakeholders are not left out. My recommendation to this is simply to adopt that or adopt that recommendation.
Are you talking about all of page 3?
No, I'm talking
Just
about
the
grievance
grievance
one.
number one.
Their report, the
This
grievance committee
is
report.
Dave's recommendations.
Well,
Oh, okay, these.
Yeah, so if you turn to page 3 of the grievance committee report.
We're going through the grievance committee findings one by one.
I got it.
And we're going to deal with each of those findings.
Yes, discussion on this, yes.
Objective vagueness, I don't know what that entails.
Yeah, and I've been going over the bylaws today myself.
Wait a minute, one at a time.
Enforce, we don't have any enforcement power. we have the ability to post, but we're not gonna police people. I think the idea of it is great, but I don't know how we can possibly enforce that. I don't assume if they've given specific recommendations, I think that would make a whole lot easier for us to say yes or no.
I mean, we have the, and I apologize, I don't have my copy in front of me because I came straight from work, but we have the, posting guidelines within the bylaws. We certainly have more than enough clarity from the city attorney's office on what we're required to do, and if we wish to do more. You know, the caveat that I think we are meeting the requirements in terms of posting now.
Sure, all stakeholders.
No, I agree. I mean,
How is that possible?
no, I agree with that. That's, I mean, all stakeholders is 200,000 people or whatever. I would just say, you know, we fulfill the requirements both in the city charter and in our own bylaws of posting on a regular basis. And we don't have, facilities, we don't have staff, we don't have any ability to enforce, enforce anything. So I think if we just, obviously, we are going to do, due diligence effort to meet the requirements of our own bylaws and as advocated, you know, as advised by the city attorney in terms of posting on the web, on the spots that are open 24/7, all the things we do anyway. I mean, I would say,
This is how the grievance is worded, right?
yeah, we can't revise.
I mean,
the
yeah,
grievance.
Well,
That's
this
their
is
report.
how they're, this is how they're reported. I mean, we can do anything we want with it.
I would say, we satisfy. I mean, that's been the direction from the city attorney.
We don't, it's a nullity, we don't satisfy because it's
No,
not.
not this.
Oh,
We
okay.
satisfy the requirements in terms of, put this aside.
Yeah.
We satisfy the requirements of posting on a regular basis, general board meetings, on the web, and everywhere else that we have to. So, I mean, if we want to publicly say, we will continue to do everything within our reasonable grasp to ensure that in the future, then sure, I mean, that's a nice thing to say, but I have, you know, enforce outreach and posting, who's, I think it's that, they can say GHSNC, LA City, or anything else. I would say, you know, yes, we agree.
Well-
Everything should be out, everything should be posted, and we do our, level best to accomplish that under the requirements of the city and the Brown Act and everything else. But beyond that, we can't make a commitment to enforce outreach and agenda posting guidelines.
Is it worthwhile?
We can say we'll try and continue to meet them as we have in the past, and as we do presently, as we hope to in the future.
All right, so I'm just gonna ask this question. I would like to revisit exactly what these rules are, because I know the Brown Act says something, the Dunn rules say something else, and, you know, there's not very many of them, but we've got to post the agenda 17 hours in advance. We posted a Postal Plus, that is the place where you can see it 24 hours. Now, are we gonna, as a board, follow the policy of posting it in 5 places? Are we gonna also post it on our website, and are we also gonna have the webmaster send it to the mailing list?
That's what we should, as well as the
Right.
ENS, yes.
Okay.
It's-
I had to
Is that what we should say here, you think?
I think we should say that, yeah, to
Okay.
express willing. Now, I gotta tell you, you know, this is kind of parallel to the path we're on, but not on, exactly on it. I've been trying to work with Aaron to get these MailChimp mailings out, and I've not been very successful with that so far. But I've been striving to get these things, and I think we should post them at the same time as you post the things on the website. I think we should get the MailChimp things posted so people have 72 hours notice. As it happens, you know, that's what will encourage people to come. So I want to make sure that, I want to say that that's our policy. I want to say that, you know, not only do we meet the requirements, but I want to reiterate what our policy is. 72 hours, one location that's visible 24 hours a day, 24 hours a day, at least four other locations, websites, MailChimp.
Well, when you say MailChimp, but is that,
It's email blast.
That's basically an email blast.
That's the email,
Right.
yeah, that's just the service they use,
Right.
the email blast. When you get that nice pretty email with that logo and that's MailChimp.
All right, there, yes, go
Sorry,
ahead.
I know this is just the first one. Two things. One, to Anthony's comment, I think a big difference between when this grievance was filed and now is the MailChimp email blast that we hadn't done in the past. So I think that would still be in line with, I think, the spirit of this recommendation of this grievance, but not the specific recommendation of this grievance here. And I hope that would at least satisfy this recommendation grievance from the grievance. My other second comment is, by making this this executive board saying, yeah, we recommend this recommendation, or however it's worded, is that saying that we've done it incorrect in the
No.
past? Are we basically?
No, we're just adding another layer.
And, you know, one thing I think we should predicate all this with is we fulfill our obligations. Nobody has argued, nobody has said, no one with any authority and actual power has said we have not. Since
We're just on the radar.
since 2006, we have fulfilled the obligations from the city and our own guidelines. And all these are basically efforts to try and do a good job better. And that's all they are. They're not acknowledgements of wrongdoing. And one other thing I would like to offer though is, and they can't be commitments. Because next year, if our budget gets zeroed out, guess what? We're not paying for MailChimps.
Yep.
So we can't commit to anything. I'll be brutally honest about it, because nobody here has any money to do this. There are no dues. This is completely voluntary. There's no budgetary funds for outreach, period, if the city says, guess what, we're gonna zero you out. So I would just strongly say, you know, before we do it, I mean, however we go forward on this, we should probably do two things. One, there's been no finding of fact that there's been any violation from anybody with any real authority over this body, by the city attorney or anybody else. There's been a warning letter, for lack of a better term, from the district attorney's office. And there's absolutely, we can't commit to anything, because it's entirely possible there'll be no budget to do any of this.
Or enough
We have no control over that.
seats that we're building.
Yeah, and, you know, so I would just say, you know what, we can affirm our desire to do a better job, just like every other governmental entity in this country. But I do not believe we should commit to anything, and we certainly should not suggest that in any way we've fallen short in the past.
Well, I like Anthony's idea of simply going through and saying, here's what we need to do in terms of posting, and here's what we intend to do in the future.
Intention is one thing.
Yeah.
I'm just strong as if we cannot commit to anything.
But by the way, I would say just for the record, Joel, just so you know, MailChimp for our purposes is a free service. You know, it's one of these things that has a free service, then you start paying for it. They're free.
Aaron's not free. My time's not free, your time's not free.
I know, well, if Aaron goes away, you know, that becomes part of the secretary's job,
All-
to get
all
these
I'm-
things posted,
all
and I
I'm-
don't happily do that.
Okay,
MailChimp thing.
that's great, but all I'm trying to say is we can't commit to doing something beyond what we're doing now, because we have no way, if we put it down in writing that we will do X, Y, or Z, someone will find a reason to raise that. And if there's no budget for it, or if we choose to spend our budget in a different way, in essence, we put it down in writing, you're making an obligation, a commitment that someone can find as a cause of action. Please back me up, Mr. Attorney.
I don't know, this is not my jurisdiction either.
One can sue over, one can sue over anything. One can sue over anything. And you know what? We fulfill the obligations as we've been directed by the city attorney's office and by the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. If someone else tells us something different, fine.
And by the way, I just want to make the record, whatever, you know, we may as well just get this out now, even though I know it's number one, but we'll probably have 90% of the conversation on number one. None of this is binding on us. What's binding on us is one posting in the Postal Plus, 72 hours, that's what's binding
Then
on
let's
us.
affirm that we will make one posting, 72 hours, post of fact plus, period, end of story. Anything else is gravy.
Well, I don't have a problem with simply saying that it's our intent to conform with Brown Act and with the Dunn requirements for posting. Dunn requirements for posting may very well change in the next 6
Yeah,
months.
that's another point.
Use
There's
that
a lot of
word,
things.
use that word intent.
It's our intent.
Recommendation.
Okay.
It's
I like
our,
that.
it's our intent to conform with all current and or future requirements of Dunn. They're the ones who run us.
All right.
And I like that wording you said about due diligence, actually. Due diligence to make sure that we do
Well,
intent.
well-
Okay, I will come up with some wording that captures the scope of this discussion.
All right.
So we're on two?
Yeah, let's go to two. The grievance panel recommendation was, it must include pro and con voices to be heard in issues that are open for debate, to allow all relevant information to be heard by stakeholders. My comment on this at the start is that the grievance panel presented no evidence that the neighborhood councils failed to provide an inclusive open forum for discussion of issues. However, as a matter of general principle, I don't have a problem with the recommendation of the grievance panel, and that we can accept it, just as a statement of general principle, without any acknowledgement that we failed to do that in the past, because I don't believe we have.
I don't believe we have either, and I don't.
No, I mean, again,
If you wanna acknowledge it, that's fine, I think we should move on, because that's ridiculous. I've been on this panel since day one, and I've never noticed Dave or even,
Jim.
Jim before him, not giving people their due diligence, and we've had a lot of heated discussions.
because
So, a pro and con on different issues, so I don't understand that.
Then why don't we just do what we did for number one? We say this whole business about to allow relevant information, that's bogus. The important thing is the first statement here. We reaffirm our intention and commitment to providing a voice for all, to allow all parties to be heard on any issue. Something like that.
As per City of Los Angeles Code, Robert's Rules of Order, and everything else.
Yeah,
We already-
exactly.
we already
Okay, that's
function
fine, let's
there.
move on.
Yeah.
And just one other thing, I noticed maybe this is a thread throughout, but the wording just isn't crisp enough or must, that's giving us an obligation. It's oftentimes that there won't be pro and con voices. So based on this recommendation, we must have both sides. That's just not gonna happen. That's it's an
Yeah.
impossibility, so. again,
Well,
I don't know how many.
But the point is that when you have an issue up for debate, and all of you've been on the council long enough to know that we operate according to rules, Robert's Rules of Order. And that the proper way to do that is give an opportunity for both pro and con. Quite often, there is not a pro or con discussion. There's, it may be everyone's in favor of a motion or everyone's against a motion. More likely, it's everyone's in favor of it, and you don't have anyone to speak. But you simply gotta give that opportunity, that's all.
That's what I'm saying is
Yeah.
missing from this, that word opportunity. It's saying you must include those voices, but
Yeah, but-
I'm not gonna find somebody out on the street to pull them in. That's what I'm saying, like,
Yeah.
it seems like these recommendations, the spirit of it I see, but we're talking like, through like, every word means something. So if things are missing, then I'm not gonna feel comfortable saying, we should.
Good, I'm glad you said that, because I'm going to make my point again that I made at the start. These are recommendations, which we're going to do things, and our response to this is that we are going to allow the opportunity for pro and con voices.
Okay.
Simple as that.
Was the second one quicker than the first one?
Well, it'll get quicker.
It's already been this 25 minutes.
It's like this exponential thing.
All right. Number 3. Arguing that we're gonna do with the PTA.
All right, the recommendation of the committee was they did not find a violation of bylaws. We recommend having the bylaws updated to say that collaboration may only occur with organizations that follow the Brown Act.
And I say that's
Well,
bullshit.
here's,
I think that should be kicked to committee.
You cannot do that. In fact, our first page of our bylaws, Article 2, basically says we have to collaborate with other organizations within the community to help them in accomplishing their goals with the neighborhood council's determination to support and are consistent with the bylaws. If only other government organizations, I don't know,
There aren't any.
there aren't any.
The other one is Council District 12.
Yeah, so I mean, if that was the case, we'd never get anything done.
yeah, as I observed, it would preclude us from cooperating, collaborating with the Chamber of Commerce, the
Residents
Business
group,
Association,
the religious organizations.
the women's
I think
group.
Grievance 3 is fine the way you have it written up here.
All right, so
Recommend not to.
recommend not to adopt.
And I also believe that we've already covered the response to this in number 2. I mean, the grievance seems to be concerned with allowing everybody to have an open voice.
Well, no, there's a very specific tagline here that the grievance committee basically said that the only organizations that the.
We can
council
collaborate
with
with.
are those who follow the Brown Act. Well, guess what? There are no other organizations in Granada Hill South that follow the Brown Act.
Other than the Design Review Board,
There you
is
go.
the only one that I'm aware of.
I agree that we're not going to
So-
follow that recommendation.
Okay, so.
But at least, you know, in those areas that we're not, we should have a good.
So why would the grievance panel recommend this? I wonder.
If they weren't looking at our bylaws,
Well-
No, they're not thinking.
Well,
Is-
but they must have missed our bylaws.
We have,
They're not thinking.
All
How is
right,
that possible?
again, I don't want to revert to
Yeah.
process questions here. If we believe that there's something wrong with the recommendation, then we should simply say so and reject it.
Reject it.
And give the reasons why.
Okay, sorry.
That's all right.
I just-
Okay.
All right.
Grievance 4 and grievance 5, there was no violation found, which brings us to grievance 6. Grievance 6 was the recommendation to be more active in trying to facilitate an active and healthy debate with stakeholders.
But wasn't that 2?
No, that's number 6.
yeah.
But wasn't that part of?
The other two were set aside.
Okay.
Here's my comment on this. No evidence was presented by the grievance panel that myself or Brad or anyone else in the chair has failed to allow public comment on meetings. There's no evidence was presented by the grievance panel that this organization has failed to provide outreach or facilitate debate on the residential floor plan, which was specific in the grievance. In that the recommendation of the grievance panel should not be adopted. And I'm gonna direct this, yeah, Mr. Kuzma, go ahead.
If I may.
Mm-hmm.
When you're mentioning that the grievance panel did not provide you with evidence to support these findings, what you are getting is the response of the grievance panel after reviewing the evidence that was submitted to them. If the neighborhood council would also like to see the evidence that the grievance panel saw to make these determinations, I'd be more than happy to provide it to you.
Well, let me say this. You've been videotaping our meetings since at least June, perhaps earlier last year. Did you submit any of those videotapes to the grievance committee? It's a simple yes or no question, sir. Did you
No.
submit any of those videotapes?
No.
All right, so if there was something on one of those videotapes for as far back as 6 to 8 months ago, then your failure to submit that and show a violation is what is known in law as an adverse inference, meaning that you had an opportunity to go to the grievance committee and say, in June of last year, the president or the vice president, or if it was Mr. Schimmelheim in the chair, did not allow public comment on a certain item. I mean, you've got that evidence if you had it. If you failed to provide it, that's what I'm saying. The grievance committee didn't come up and say, our finding was that on such and such a date, public comment was not allowed. What they said is, we find that public comment was not allowed. Well, you know, let me just say from my background, which is an advocacy background, and for the last 9 years, a trier of facts as an arbitrator and a hearing officer with the civil service commissions of the city and the county, that a simple allegation is simply that. It is not, an allegation is not fact. Facts are what you might see if you had a videotape that demonstrated that, or a witness who said, this is what happened, and you also solicited witness testimony from other people who might have been at that meeting. In other words, if you're going to find a fact, then there needs to be a full and complete hearing regarding that fact. I didn't see anything from like that coming from the grievance panel.
Mm-hmm.
That's my
Whether they felt they had an obligation to provide the evidence that was provided to them when they made their report, I don't know.
Well,
they had evidence, it wasn't videos, but it was all documents, all public documents. All the evidence that was
Then they should
presented
have
to the panel
submitted-
to make the findings.
Then they should have
was there.
submitted that with their
Again,
report.
they weren't asked to submit the evidence, they were asked to submit their recommendations,
Well,
so.
we have to-
But, you know, all I have here is
Again,
something
go on.
that's,
I just wanted to make the
Either or.
point that they did have evidence even though they didn't provide it in their report.
well, as far as I'm concerned,
Too vague.
you know.
I need to know,
yeah,
I need
this-
specifics.
Well, I'm gonna, can I jump in here?
Yes,
yeah.
I want to just to stay, now I'm back to going down the middle of the road here, and I just want to stay with the reality of the thing, and the recommendation is be more active in trying to facilitate an active and healthy debate with stakeholders. And we can argue till the cows come home about what we've done in the past about facilitating such a debate, but right now, we can reaffirm commitment to facilitating an active and healthy debate with stakeholders, or we can continue to facilitate an active and healthy debate with stakeholders. Because the way that grievance is written, you know, nobody can say it's a bad, you know, general idea, and if we overrule it, that kind of looks a bit weird.
Well,
in my
the
opinion.
way that it's couched is be more active in trying to facilitate an active and healthy debate,
Implying that.
implying that we have not.
What's the metric on more?
What's more?
Okay, so the board's position is that it has facilitated, it has strived to facilitate an active and healthy debate with stakeholders, and will continue to do so. And
But again, that goes back
No,
to
that's-
grievance number 2 that we were talking about, pro and con. That is the active debate.
Regardless, that's.
well, that's it. So,
Right,
is
so
that good?
Would
what I
that,
said?
would that be acceptable to everybody?
Yeah.
As long as this whole thing has to be prefaced that we're not acknowledging, you know, the inference that someone can make, or what's being implied here. And there was no evidence for us to see, based on what the grievance panel supposedly looked at. And a lot of these things are vague.
And no outside authority is.
But
How do you correct something that you don't have any evidence to correct? In other words, how do you correct something you don't know anything about?
That's why in Dave's profession, right, it wouldn't be heard.
Yeah.
You can't base an opinion on something and make a judgment on something.
You don't
It's
have
just
anything to
opinion
make a
and
judgment on.
hearsay.
Yeah, my whole point is simply that, you know, I've been, and Brad has been with this organization since the beginning, since 2007, when we were holding regular meetings. And I agree, you know, when Jim was president, he would bend over backwards oftentimes to let people speak. And I try to, you know, to keep that same spirit while trying also to, keep within Robert's Rules of Order and make sure that the meeting moves along in a timely fashion, doesn't get out of control. But, I have a problem simply with the boards be more active in trying to facilitate, because I think we have been, met the letter of the law in terms of allowing people to speak, whether it's stakeholders or board members, and allowing voices to be heard here. So I simply, as the chair for the last 3 terms, take umbrage at the committee's assumption that we have not been doing that.
Because they're not at the meetings, right?
Yeah.
Or any
None
meetings.
None of them have been in any other place.
Except for Linda, who has a gripe, hasn't been in any meetings for like 3 years.
Yeah, exactly.
All
So,
right, well, I like your wording.
Okay, so number 6, the board's position that it has strived to facilitate an active and healthy debate with stakeholders and will continue to do so.
Good, I like that. Everybody in consensus for that?
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to 8A. And I'm not sure why they numbered it this way.
Because there are 2 number 8s, that's why. In the original agreement.
Yeah, I'm just not sure. All right, well,
They're
whatever.
pretty explicit which one's which.
Yeah. 8A, the finding and recommendation is, while the committee had found no violation of the bylaws, it suggested the bylaws be changed to allow non-resident property owners to have an at-large position on the board. We suggest that non-resident stakeholders must own a residential property within the boundaries.
I don't get that.
I don't understand that. Perhaps.
Well, I went through the bylaws, and really if you look at the definition for candidates, for homeowners, it does say that for homeowners, that it should be someone who owns property and lives in the home.
Yes.
And I think the point that was made, and Ms. Kuzma, I'll say this, it's a valid point, because the definition of a stakeholder is someone that lives on property, works within the boundaries of the neighborhood council. So I think there is a problem between the definition of that particular stakeholder and what we have in the definition of the homeowner stakeholder. I think it could be very easily remedied by a change in the definition of the homeowner's position.
so you're saying that the words live in should be stricken?
Well, I would refer that
Well,
to the
I mean, that would
bylaws
be-
committee, but I think that would satisfy it.
Because you could own the property and rent it out.
Right.
and
But
still
we
satisfy the homeowner.
have that already covered in as far as the commercial property owners. Commercial property owners don't have to live in Granada Hills,
Right,
but
which
you
is-
own property in Granada Hills,
Commercial.
and therefore you
Not
are a
residential.
stakeholder.
Yeah, but
It's
that-
like bonding.
Residential property that's up for lease, that by definition
Yeah.
is commercial.
And Cindy Wood Friedman, I don't know if she owns any property. She lives out in
Yeah.
Chatsworth someplace, but her business is in Granada
Yeah.
Hills.
Yeah.
She's a
But I-
stakeholder.
Regardless, those stakeholders are still, because they are stakeholders, they can vote at the at-large. The question is, should they be represented by a specialty seat?
No.
I think it's a question that should go to the bylaws committee, and I think the bylaws committee should take a look at it
Okay.
and make a recommendation.
I'd support that, that's fine. You're trying to get a census of people who own residential property, don't live here, and care enough about the community to be involved is probably gonna be an interesting thing.
Yeah, that's my problem. I have with that. Okay.
Well, take it to the bylaws committee, let the bylaws committee discuss it, and come back with a recommendation on it. And if the recommendation is that they're represented by the at-large stakeholders, and we're fine with that, then that's the recommendation, and the board can decide. But I really think that there is an issue there that we need to look at.
8B, I agree. Take it up to the city attorney's office.
8B is the committee.
This is
Yeah.
the whole thing about early notification. So let me dive in with
Yes.
HB. I would say that I don't want to get into it. I don't want to get into it about you know, whether or not the committee could reverse this denial. The fact of the matter is, the done policy is that we use the early notification committee, and I think we should reaffirm our commitment to using the early notification system, per the done policy.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that,
So-
other than, you know, basically, this was couched as a Brown Act violation as opposed to a Dunn violation. I think that's why the city attorney, you know, said,
Brown Act is law, done is.
done is done. And, you know, let me be just brutally honest here. You know, Dunn has a lot of policies and regulations that a lot of neighborhood councils do not follow for one reason or another. And other than the requirements for training, there are no penalties that I'm aware of, you know, if you don't use the ENS. In other words, Dunn is saying this is the best practices, you should do it. I agree with that. Dunn's problem, I think, is that, you know, they made this recommendation about a year and a half ago, but they never put it out to any of the neighborhood councils in terms of utilizing it. And then, you know, the problem is they post it on their website, but there's never an email, there's never any training process which says, here's how you do this.
And Anthony, you know, when we started, we had a full-time person assigned to us who had one of, I think, she had 4.
Yeah.
We don't have anybody assigned to us. There's no staff support. I mean, Dunn is barely limping along. They're at about 30% of the budget they had when they started.
Oh, I know all about what's going on.
And my only point is, you know, there are things that, as Dave said, are in fact, yes, best practices. They're best practices for the city of Los Angeles. That doesn't mean that they're legal requirements. So, you know,
Well,
we're trying.
Yeah,
believe,
I will say
and we
this,
can continue to
using the
try.
ENS is not a huge deal.
We have to, it's one email, you send an email.
Yeah, you send an email, and actually, you know, you simply send it to Dunn Support, and they forward it on, so it's not a huge deal. So I don't have a problem with just making a note here that we intend to use the ENS in the future,
That's fine.
even though we're gonna reject the funding.
We intend to use.
Yeah.
All right, is that 9 now?
That was 8B, so we reject.
Would that be included in the bylaws that we use ENS?
No, that we included in the bylaw means.
Because there may not be an ENS, you never know.
Yeah,
I
if
mean,
it goes
ENS
away,
is simply,
right.
a
Okay.
city function.
Service right now that could be
Yeah,
cut tomorrow.
they could defund that tomorrow and, you know, could go away.
Like having a full-time
Just ask me.
deputy for our neighborhood council.
Yeah.
All right, number 9, the committee upholds this denial. Even with this denial, the committee still recommends the following, and I'm reading the italics. No one may use their title to further any agenda that has not been approved by the Granada Hills South Neighborhood Council Board, nor can the council use their name, likeness, letterhead, nor can they use any other letterhead unless approved by the board.
Then why did they give us cards?
All right.
Well,
How do you not do that? It's kind of a contradiction in,
Let's see, do I have any?
they usually, I left them on my desk at home. Yeah, they gave
Well, I
us
think the
business
idea is that
cards.
you don't use the fact that you're on the board or your cards, except unless you're on board business. The only time I've ever given out my cards
But
is when one of
I'm
your
always going to
residents-
my neighbor's house and say, if you have an issue with this and you want to know some city department or something like that, give me a call, I will help you look
That's
it up.
board business, and it's up down the middle of board business.
hold on, I'm gonna recognize Mr. Kuzma here.
Specifically, this was about a letter you wrote, Mr. Bouvet, to the Department of City Planning that was on Old Granada Hills South Neighborhood Council letterhead,
Yes.
where your first designation was as president of the Neighborhood Council South, followed by president of the ORG. That was the problem, because the letter was really from the residents group and not from the neighborhood
No,
council.
the letter was not from the residents group, the neighbor was.
It was on the
from me.
residents group letterhead, so
I
the
understand.
assumption is it came from the residents group.
I understand, but it was not from the residents group, nor, and I made that clear, that it was from me as a letter, all right? In other words,
Okay, so what the grievance panel is saying, and what my objection is if it's just coming from Mr. Bouvet, just sign it Mr. Bouvet, stakeholder, you know?
well, no,
Don't put it on a letterhead where a member of the public's gonna say, what's going on here? And that's the letter
Here's
that's
the
being
problem.
spoken
Here's the
of,
problem.
so that you guys know what that evidence was in this.
here's the
complaint.
problem, is that people have a right to identify themselves with their affiliation with the organization. I did not, in that letter, either say that I was stating a position from Old Granada Hills or from the neighborhood council. In fact, really what it was an analysis of demographics for the area of the Granada Hills. It wasn't taking a position on anything. It was simply laying out some demographic errors, at least in my opinion, that the folks that had been hired by the city planning department had made. So I would agree with you to the extent that people should not be using letterhead in representing that they're representing the council unless the council has specifically passed a motion.
GHSNC letterhead.
Yeah, right. But that particular letter was not taking a position on anything. That particular letter was simply criticizing the study that had been done on the EIR and pointing out that there were errors in the demographic assumptions. If you could find where I took a position on something in that letter, I'd be happy to reverse what I'm saying, but I don't think you can,
Okay,
because I know
but
what
you
I
just
wrote.
said you were making a comment on the environmental impact
Right.
report, which is in the community plan. You know, you were giving input to the community plan.
But I have the right to identify myself with my affiliation with organizations. I could have just as well
But
said.
then you would have not had somebody's letterhead for that letter. It would have been blank. It would have said Dave Bouvet at the top, and then at the bottom you could have signed it and put your titles, but not on Old Granada Hills.
So your
Southwest,
objection is that it was on Old Granada Hills letterhead,
and it had
And
both
take it up.
titles.
and that I put both titles.
Exactly.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I just don't see that as
Yeah, I don't either.
Well,
something that's
it's
objectionable.
it
Doesn't imply anything. Beyond that.
again, to a lay person that sees this out of the blue, who is this and why is this opinion being submitted? And is it being submitted on behalf of the neighborhood council who he's the president of? Or is it being submitted on behalf of this Old Granada Hills residents group whose letterhead this letter is on? Okay? It's,
I think that I could see the confusion in what you're totally.
again, it's just,
But
don't let it
but
happen again.
I think this would be more of an issue for Old Granada Hills residents group to have a quorum with how. it's
No,
written, not-
it had a Granada Hills South Neighborhood Council's representatives.
but the
I'm the
letterhead-
president. This is
but
my
that's just-
signature.
That just happens to be his other affiliation. It's the letterhead is what you're having issue
Well,
with.
there's the letterhead, and then there's the Granada Hills Neighborhood Council South reference.
Everyone always puts with their affiliations at
Again,
the bottom.
you know
The
what?
letterhead
All right,
is
I would
something
like,
separate.
I don't want to
I'm just telling you what it's based on, so you know when you talk. Okay.
Okay, here's how I would like to, this is not taken over, here's how I would like to proceed with this. The panel has made a recommendation and it's given us a paragraph here that I'm figuring, it doesn't say specifically, but that wants to be, they want us to put that in the bylaws. So I'm requesting that our action is to take that paragraph and kick it to the bylaws committee as to whether or not they want to include it in the bylaws.
Okay.
Simple as that.
All right, very
And
good.
that will resolve that issue.
We've done the bylaws.
Yeah, that's not here earlier.
No, it's not that at all. That's the response to that issue.
David realized it's a First Amendment issue right there, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's
this
what I'm
is not-
saying.
Yeah, come on.
All right, let's move on.
GHSNC letterhead.
Let's move to number 12, which is the next item. The committee reverses the dismissal. The Granada Hills South Neighborhood Council must follow the Dunn resolution as passed on 10/5/10, which states adopt and approve the bylaws table of contents, which was attached to Appendix 1.
Sorry, this is number 10 then?
This is on number 12.
What happened to number 10? Recommendation
Maybe
is
there's
transparency.
I didn't have any comment on that.
Well, we've got to address that.
Yeah, I simply missed that. I guess.
Is transparency defined? Transparency over the makeup of the board and stakeholders.
We have no control
We have
over the
no-
makeup of the board or the stakeholders.
Well, we certainly have no control over the makeup of the stakeholders, that's anybody who shows up, essentially. And the makeup of the board, there's transparency every
You gotta
time
be
there's an
elected.
election.
Yeah.
So-
Mr. Kuzman, what, I'm gonna ask you,
In
what's
other
your?
words, it goes right back, because in the bylaws, it says that a neighborhood group cannot be more than 51% of the board members, and we have a neighborhood group that, a lot of those members from that group are on this neighborhood council, and the public needs to know whether they belong to that group or not, so that they know whether that the board is still in compliance with the bylaws and is under 51%
Isn't that a
members.
constitutional issue?
It's in your bylaws, Eric.
Well,
Again, this is very vague, not.
Yeah.
specific.
Again,
I understand
actually
the
it got
spirit of it.
resolved at the November 18th Brown Act training, when you had to vote on giving money to the Old Granada Hills Residents Group, and every board member, before they got up and voted, had to state any affiliation that they might have had with the group before the vote was taken, whether they were abstaining, recusing, or voting. I mean,
And we
it's very simple.
We've always done that.
Yeah,
Never
we're always-
ever been.
I mean, that's the first time I ever saw it
Yeah.
done.
That was the first time that you've been to our meetings where such an issue would have come up, but it's not the first time we paid the Old Granada Hills Residents Group, it's not the first time we paid the Friends of Granada Hills Library, it's not the first time we paid any of the organizations that everyone else is involved with.
Okay, simply, if there's a thing in the bylaws that says you cannot have a neighborhood group hold 50%, 51% or more of those board seats, then you should have a way of identifying whether the board, what groups the board members are associated in, so that the public knows whether that balance is still in check.
and that can come at the time of any vote. In other words, if there's an issue of, and I agree with you, I think the city attorney clarified that, because we had an issue earlier with the Friends of the Library, in the
Never trusted those people.
Yeah, those
the
library
original
books.
advice we got years ago, and I'm going back 5 years, all right, involved the Chamber of Commerce, because we had at least 3 board members from the Chamber of Commerce, maybe more at that time, because I don't remember if Jerry was on as well. We had at least 3 members on the board who were on both boards.
They were officers, they weren't just members.
They were on both
Yeah.
boards, they weren't just members. And so we sought advice from the city attorney at that time regarding an issue that's, as far as interacting with and funding one of the chamber's events. And the advice of the city attorney at that time, I'll recognize you just a second, Jerry. Advice of the city attorney at that time was that those folks should recuse themselves and leave the room, all right? Which they did, and which we've done in other times past. When we got to this thing with Debbie Wubin, the Friends of the Library, Debbie is not on the board of the Friends of the Library, she's a member, all right? And the advice from the city attorney then was that she should still recuse herself and leave the room. And the problem arose because that was conflicting advice, all right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what we need to clear up, and that's why the city attorney gave us that specific advice at the November 18th meeting, because they had in fact given us 2 conflicting opinions over a period of time. Jerry?
Reading the bylaws section, and it's confusing at best. Accordingly, no single community stakeholder group shall comprise a majority. I don't know what makes up a community stakeholder group. It could be those people between the age of 20 and 40 years old. It could be something based on gender, education level, or any number of other things. I would agree with Eric that it could be discriminatory and infringes on a right of association. I'd suggest referring that to the bylaws.
I think
Have it removed from
absolutely,
the bylaws.
you're absolutely right there, because, you know,
It just occurs to me, for instance, that literally almost every board member is also a homeowner. Is that a stakeholder group? We have it defined in our bylaws.
Yeah.
Does that mean that homeowners, since we have defined a homeowner as a specialty seat, that would in accordance to our bylaws be that that's a group that's a majority?
And, you know, far be it from me to cite the fact that this was what in fact the city urged every neighborhood council in formation to do, is spell out this membership issue to the nth degree beyond. I mean, when I was on the charter reform thing, I said, let's just make it citizens, period. And I got laughed out of the room. Okay? So there's a reason we have all these interesting definitions and all these seats and everything else, and it's because the most common sense definition of a stakeholder would be somebody who actually lives within the jurisdiction and is an American citizen. And that's essentially too restrictive, of course, according to the city charter. So we have these umpteen different seats. And yet, the point is, if we take it to its extreme, then basically no one can vote for anything, because we're all, the fact that we all live in Granada Hills South is a stakeholder.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
let's
you know.
refer this language to the bylaws committee then. Eric, take some notes that we're gonna refer this, because, you know, technically, you know, I'm looking around here, I see 5, 6 of us here that are all homeowners. Yeah.
3 veterans.
Yeah.
All right, so
Let's
let's refer that.
One of the things that, excuse me, there's something I want to say. One of the things that bothers me, the reason neighborhood councils were created in the first place was to help take care of your neighborhood, your area. You're an advocate for your area. And almost all of these committees, these groups from the community groups across the board, if they're really community groups, they're going to be active. And that means that they're going to associate with other community groups to get things done. You cannot get things done in a vacuum. You have to communicate with all of these other groups to get anything done at all, and that's what, it's a contradiction.
But what it seems like, again, the spirit of that might be, is maybe what we would think of as a community group, where it's like a 501c3, like Old Granada Hills Residents Group, or Little Chambers with the 501c6. You know, those sort of things is probably what. Yeah, so I think maybe just when you go through the bylaws, it's probably 501c incorporated entity as a group.
All right, so we're gonna refer that to bylaws and let you guys wrestle with it.
Thank you.
Number 12.
That's why I agree. That's right.
Well, and let me just say, I invited Eric because there are some things that obviously are going to, the bylaws. However, you know, we've got a new board that will be seated in April, and the bylaws are not gonna be changed before June or July. Dunn's already said they will take no action on bylaws changes till after the election cycle is through. So, you know, this isn't something that has to be done, you know, jammed in the next couple of months. It's actually gonna be the new board's decision.
And you, Brad, you already mentioned that once the meetings that you've been to, that Dunn is talking about making some changes.
There are
that will-
significant changes in the offing.
Exactly, so,
Okay.
All right, let's go to 12, please. 12 is the committee reversed the dismissal. And it says the Granada Hills South Neighborhood Council must follow the Dunn resolution as passed on 10/5/10, which states adopt and approve the bylaws table of contents. You know, I'm not even sure how the committee made this finding. First of all, again, I don't think they have the authority to reverse the original dismissal. But as all of you know, we went through the bylaws back in 2011. We utilized
Away, I remember the meetings.
we utilized the template that was sent to us by Dunn, And in fact, our parliamentarian, Mike Cabo, was the regional co-chair, and was authorized to go through and assist and help the neighboring councils make sure that they follow the template, which he did in our case. So I'm not sure, you may speak, sir, but I'm not.
Again, to help you understand the issue, I complained about bylaws, you told me several times they were current, they were not, they were 2009 bylaws, the new table of contents was from 2010. The 2010 template got uploaded with some minor changes after you corresponded with Layla, was it, Campos?
No.
At Dunn? Or Gracie Lou? Gracie Lou.
Yes.
And then in September, those bylaws were posted with the new table of contents format. Now, the issue is at the December 2010 Granada Hills South Neighborhood Council Bylaws Committee meeting, that resolution was on your agenda to take care of doing the bylaws and filling in the blanks with what works for your neighborhood council. Now, inasmuch as now we have the right table of contents format up, it should be referred to the bylaws committee to start filling in the blanks that had not been done yet. And those blanks being things like Article 14, which is compliance with the training, and in that category is where you would designate what the consequences are if a board member doesn't complete their training, ethics, and funding within a certain period of time.
Let me just say
So
that
that's
we went
where
through
it's
this.
coming from.
We already went through this in 2011, and we determined which areas we would want to fill in. So we've already been through that process.
But they,
Look,
go ahead, I'm just,
All right.
go ahead, never mind.
The problem with the posting was that we had several items that we were not in complete agreement with Dunn. Those were sent to Ms. Lou, and she did not respond to us for about 9 months. And then she responded with the updated bylaws, which she had made some corrections to.
Right.
All right. However, you're right, those bylaws, as she sent us as corrected, were not immediately posted on the website. But they were in conformance with the template that was presented to us in 2011. So, the correct bylaws have been presented. If
They're up there now, the main thing is,
Yeah, it's
work
a
on
moot
filling
issue
in the
as far as
blanks.
I'm concerned. All right.
Okay, so what are we doing about number 12? Are we going to refer to the bylaws, or are we going to?
No, there's no need to. The bylaws are in conformance.
but they're incomplete.
But the council's already decided, Mr. Kuzma, that they're not gonna fill in those sections. That's optional for us. And when we went through it at the time, we made the decision we didn't wanna fill those in.
Go on.
Okay, let's move on. Number 13. The grievance panel came back with this. The committee also reversed its decision. They said the council must follow the Dunn resolution as passed, which states and adopt and approve the bylaws table of contents. Again, this is the same issue, and I think it's a moot issue at this point.
Okay, 14.
Okay, number 14, the committee recommends that the outreach committee be put on the monthly agenda to give reports as stated in the bylaws. Also, it's recommended that the language in the bylaws be clarified so there's no ambiguity as to whether or not the community outreach committee is required to present their findings at every meeting. I'm recommending we send this to the bylaws committee because I think there is some ambiguity there. Agree?
Certainly.
Okay, what are we exactly sending to them? Is the outreach committee supposed to have monthly meetings?
Yes, no, what it says is they should give us a report every month.
Which essentially the outreach chair does, it's to the point, there was no outreach.
Right,
committee
but
activity.
I think it would be good to send this to the bylaws committee, and make it clear, not just outreach, but all the committees meet on an as-needed basis, rather than a monthly basis. There's, with the exception of the plum committee, there's no need for most of these committees to meet every month.
Yeah, the bylaws committee doesn't meet unless we have that.
I've only ever been to one bylaws committee meeting since I've been on the board, that was
Right.
that thing we did.
Yeah, most of these are as an as-needed basis, and I think that needs to be clarified in the bylaws, so.
All right.
All right, so where are we, 15? Recommendation, that the committee recommend that the council follows the ENS requirements immediately, so it can be in compliance. I just, as far as I'm concerned, we can adopt this as is, I don't have a problem with it. It's a fairly simple procedure. Any objection to that?
Just with the caveat, as long as it's available.
Yeah, it's not ours, it's cities, I'm sure.
Okay. All right. Let's go to 16. 16, the finding recommendation is, while the committee finds no violation, it's recommended that the bylaws committee look into removing the word represent from Article 6, Section 4, to create more transparency for stakeholders.
Yeah, right, do you have that in front of you, you can read it out what that is. Article 6, Section 4.
Section 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The treasurer shall maintain records of the council's finances and books of accounts and perform other duties in accordance with the council's budget and the department's policies and procedures.
Where's the word represent?
Yeah, where's the word represent?
That's section 2.
Oh, yeah.
Under officers.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Wait,
You go to 6, section 6. Oh, sorry, section 4.
Section 4.
You went to paragraph 4.
Okay.
Just one more,
This one?
Article 6, section 2, paragraph 4.
Article 6,
Or
section 2, A.
No,
Four.
section 4.
It says here, Article 6, Section 4.
So that's section 3.
There's no 4.
There is no 4.
Did he mean article?
That's the only thing I can see is 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey, Eric, they were talking about Article 6, section 2, where it says A, the president shall, item number 4.
He just read that.
But I just read that.
The president shall, he started talking about the treasurer.
No, he says 4. Section 2,
A then.
I mean,
It'd be A.
you mean
yeah,
A,
A, the president shall
act
4
as the chief executive of the council, shall preside at all council meetings and shall reserve and serve as ex officio member of all committees. Again, where's represent?
Yeah, we don't have this.
Oh.
Our Article 6 is different.
Well,
That might
It's
be-
under our officers, articles.
well, hang on, what
Bible.
are you looking at?
Okay, the words we're looking for is represent or appoint a designee to represent the neighbourhood council on issues of community concern.
Sure.
This is,
It's Article 6, Section 2,
what's under duties of.
A.
right under the words bylaws section.
Yeah, that word's not there anymore.
Yeah, it's not there.
So, all right, good.
So let's move on.
How old is this copy? Well, it's printed out in 2000. What does it say now?
This was the latest, well, where's Mr.
This is
President?
2011.
All right, well, but he.
What are you looking at?
All right, isn't
I'm looking at
2011
it.
an old
So what is the?
Huh?
Isn't 2011 an old?
Yeah, you have
The copy had 2012.
Oh, okay.
I think that's part of the changes Gracie made. Yeah, okay, so 2012, okay, so, all right, so it's, all right, here you go. So okay, well, that raises the next question, which representative are they talking about? The one where it says represent or appointed designee, or represent a neighborhood council?
Represent or appointed designee.
Well, it's not clear. Word represents in the same line twice.
I think the reference is to represent or designate to the original grievance.
if you look into context, the objection was that the president may not, essentially the president may not be a good representative of the board, was the,
I think that's
was
the
the
allegation.
crux of the thing, which,
Even though you were appointed by the board?
So he just says,
elected, yeah, he wasn't just thrown up there, he was elected, but I think,
the president shall appoint a designate, so instead of saying, so looking at the top here, it says that, you know, putting the whole thing together, it says the president shall represent or appoint a designee to represent the neighbourhood council on issues of community concern. The grievance panel is recommending that we kick this to the bylaws committee to look at removing the word represent, and it says the president shall appoint a designee.
Well,
It doesn't preclude him from appointing himself, by the way.
it doesn't make any sense.
That's just pretty ridiculous, like.
You know,
It is
let's just refer this to bylaws committee. If you think it makes no sense, then you can reject the recommendation.
Fine.
Okay.
Sounds good, 16, sorry.
Mine too, I should have recopied it, I thought those were current.
All right, 17.
That was just, hold on, no, that was 16, we're gonna refer to 4,000. All right, 17. 17 says, while the committee may not have jurisdiction to rule on the Brown Act violations, it is recommendation that the panel that the council act in a more timely fashion when public records are requested.
I agree with 17. Previously dismissed on the advice of city attorney.
Yeah.
Well, that's a Brown Act violation, isn't it?
Yes.
But the thing about this, we don't have,
Well, there's,
some of the information that was requested was very old.
well,
It doesn't matter.
again, it's a
Well,
process.
City attorney's office has said, rejected, council.
I'm just curious, what is time, what is, do you know what the?
What is timely?
That's not even, well.
10
What
days.
is time is?
You're talking about Public Records Act.
Talking about
That's
Public
first
Records
off,
Act.
Yeah,
which
because
has nothing to do with the Brown Act,
Public
it's about
information.
public no, that's federal.
Right.
The California
Isn't
Public
this-
the California Public Records Act governs access to public records, public documents maintained by governments from every level, from the state down to, God help us, the Granada Hills South Neighborhood Council. Has nothing to do with FOIA, has nothing to do with the Brown Act, has nothing to do with any of that stuff. And the fact is, you know what, our council, who gets paid buku bucks to tell us these things, has said, move on. I vote for moving on.
So do I.
Sorry, didn't mean to.
We have no vote.
You know what?
It's a recommendation.
California
You
Public
can vote it.
Records Act
I'm
is
just
about
saying it's a
saying
recommendation.
And basically, all you really have to do, oh, where's our friend? Because I could speak on this to great detail since I was a fucking journalist for 15 years, okay? There needs to be a response, we've received your request, essentially, is all that has to come back within 10 working days. Beyond that, they can charge you for the copying fee, for the research time, for you name it. It's probably one of the weakest such acts in the world, and speaking as somebody who's tried to use it repeatedly when I was the city editor out of the Ventura County Star, it's not very helpful, but go for it.
Well, and I want to raise a point here, not that I want to make this continue, but seeing as how Jerry called me several times and bent my ear endlessly on one particular point, which was this, is that we have to be very clear about what requests are made of us that we can respond to. So we're not the conduit for every single piece of paper that somebody hears about, you know, while they're walking down the street, okay? We're responsible for giving official documents or emails that are generated by this council or its committees in the course of their duty. So if somebody happens to send an email about something to someone else, that doesn't mean that we've got to jump to attention.
That would be discovery in a civil action.
Yeah, so we need to be very clear about, you know, what the scope of our responsibility is.
I don't think we need to address it, the city attorney's office is simply already done this.
Okay.
All right. That was 17,
Yep.
18.
No, that's
That was 17. All right. All right, 18.
So what are we doing with 17? We are,
We're dismissing
Dismissing
the
it.
recommendation. 18, the recommendation, and again, they say the committee may not have jurisdiction to rule on Brown Act violations, nor remove an officer. The committee asks that the council board adhere to bylaws regarding this grievance and also understand and remedy the failure of the board to act as stated in the letter from the district attorney to the board dated 10/21/17, which was attached.
I would strongly urge that we follow the advice of council. Anytime I see the word attorney, I think if the city attorney says do X, do X.
Well, the city attorney advises to dismiss this.
That's
and
my point.
I would say we should stick with that.
Dismiss. Good for me?
All right. 19, recommendation, the committee, grievance committee recommended that the council create a better process to enforce this bylaw.
Recommendation.
We may have to go back to the original regulation.
Are they talking about enforce 18?
oh, that's right.
By the way, Dave, can I, just
Sure.
looking over this grievance, I just wanted to address one of these matters of evidence that were submitted. The grievance says the statement by the president was 100% false. The proof is that the PLU agenda references a meeting with council member Englander, which occurred on 8/26, only 2 days before the PLU meeting. I knew about that meeting before it happened. I put it on the agenda in anticipation of the meeting occurring. So there's no proof that the agenda was produced late because it included a mention of a meeting that I knew was going to occur.
All right. Well, we're on 19 here. The committee recommends that the council create a better process to enforce this bylaw. Well, and when I read this, I simply said that the grievance, there's no specific recommendation made here by the grievance panel. Simply recommended we not adopt this because of a lack of specificity. I'm just not sure what they're saying.
I've got to take an I'm sorry to do this, but
No,
I've
go
got to
ahead.
take
I-
I've got to take an opposing view here. As the secretary, there is no process right now that if a committee chairman has a meeting, he can type up the agenda on his typewriter, run it down to Postal Plus and post it within 24 hours. There is no process by which I, as the custodian of records, would ever get a copy of that agenda. And I do actually see that that's a problem.
Okay.
So I think we can, and that's why I've been banging away at everybody to email to everybody their agendas in time, because that gives me and Aaron a chance to do whatever we're supposed to be doing. But I would not mind, I don't know if it's the bylaws committee who it is, but in the absence of anything else, I'll tell you that I personally am going to try and beef up the processes so that the NC secretary can do this. I think it's a very important role of the secretary, is just to keep the papers in order. And I'm just not sure how that gets done right now. I have some vague notion that all the agendas before are somewhere on the website, except for the ones that aren't, which Mr. Cosman here has pointed out to us. And, but going forward, I think that's a very key. I do
So
think
what
that's
you're
a key.
suggesting is that any agenda generated, regardless of committee or anything, to all members?
Well, as a minimum, any agendas generated should go to the secretary, and any minutes of any meeting should go to the secretary. And then the secretary, because the secretary is the custodian of the records, if they're not getting the records,
There's two things. We don't have a rules committee, so it's actually.
We have a bylaws.
We have a bylaws.
I'm sorry, that's my point. I mean, we don't have a rules committee per se, but it's gonna go to committee, it should go to bylaws. The one thing, and I'm trying to remember exactly, requirements for, I believe it's the higher level that's required for the board meetings, per se than there are for the different types of committees. And it would be good to have that clarified before it goes to bylaws. What they have to offer.
Well, I think Anthony's point is well taken.
I'm not disagreeing with that.
Yeah,
I'm just
that
saying
there needs to be a process, and maybe we should just make a standing rule that says that all agendas for a commit, now, it's not a problem with the board agendas or the board minutes. You know, the board agendas are posted and sent out there. We're talking about committees here mostly. So why don't we refer this to Bylaws and Rules Committee to actually promulgate a rule that says committees, agendas and minutes from committees should be, how do you want to, well, you can.
We don't have any standing rules right now, do we?
That's what we're talking
No.
about. So,
No,
so
well, you know, that's an omission on the I think
Send it to
that's a
bylaws
standing
and
rule
ask
would be
and
very good
ask.
idea.
I would say send it to bylaws with the request that we ask done if they have a specific requirement or language to use that would make sense if we're going to adopt it into the bylaws.
Well, we don't have to adopt it in the bylaws. It can simply be a
Okay,
standing
fair
rule
enough. All right.
that says any agenda or minutes from a committee should be sent to the secretary as the custodian of records. I mean, that's basically.
That is
But
brilliant,
aren't the
because
min-
for two reasons. One is it does that, secondly, because it creates some standing rules. I think we need some standing rules, because you can put a whole bunch of easy, I won't call it crap, but little bits and pieces in the standing rules that you don't, that
But you
don't
don't have to put
require
in
a
bylaws.
change on the bylaws.
Right, I agree,
Exactly.
I agree. All right, so we're gonna refer that to the Bylaws and Rules Committee, and that's why we made it the Bylaws and Rules Committee several years ago, so that if we ran into this, we could
Cover the bases.
cover it. So that was 19?
Yep.
Okay, see, so I'm out of order a little bit here, because the committee didn't really follow the same numbers I had. One minute here.
That was my fault when I did the grievance. I got a couple numbers out of order, so it was really a mess.
Well,
Well, that's a problem when you have so many numbers.
let's move on here. Number
Right,
20.
Number 20.
Number 20, recommendation from the, I guess I can turn the page, is the committee recommends that the council create a better process to enforce this bylaw. So let's go again to the original.
Well, this is the one about sending agendas and so forth to the city, and I believe that if we follow the rules of the early notification system, that meets that requirement. Is that your understanding,
Yeah,
Mr. Cosman?
some of these repeat themselves just because the bylaws address it in more than one area.
All right, that's fine. Any dissent from that? So basically, I've got, if we use ENS, that there should be no problem.
That's right.
All right. Let's go to 21.
Well, there's no violation of bylaws policy, so stick to them, no.
Oh, all right.
From the previous committee, I didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry, let's go to 23. The committee recommends that the council create a better process to enforce this bylaw, seeking out positions that are not adequately represented on the neighborhood council. After identifying those positions, concrete steps must be taken to find these stakeholders. And let me just say what I had to say here, and then we can discuss this. I'm recommending that we do not adopt this recommendation, because I think there's a basic misunderstanding of what a stakeholder is. Opposition to a position, a particular, and I'll address this to you, Mr. Kuzma, opposition to a position taken by the council does not create a separate stakeholder status. It's simply, you're opposed to a position. We took about 3.5 years of discussion to adopt the bylaws that we currently have in terms of what constitutes a stakeholder. And it was after a lot of discussion and a lot of back and forth. And I was looking at a number of neighborhood councils who had specialty seats. In fact, I was looking at some in Tahunga today. And they have it broken out, differently than we have, but they have about 7 or 8 specialty seats. They have one seat for poets and writers.
Oh, I want to be on that one.
Sorry.
I guess if you want somebody represented in that seat, that's fine, but that's, that might be something that you would consider. We've taken action one time.
I remember.
Yeah, we've taken action one time to combine a seat because we quite frankly couldn't find enough, support to community organizations to support that stakeholder position. So we combined the cultural arts and parks position years ago, simply because there wasn't enough stakeholder representation or interest in the cultural arts position. So,
And in reality, along with those issues is really, if you look at how we try and provide guaranteed representation through a set-aside seat, for lack of a better term, for organizations I think anyone can identify. We do go far beyond the vast majority of other NCs across the city. I could think of maybe, of 90, it's maybe 10 that go into much detail as we do. Detail's not really the right word, but the specificity. And the other thing too, you have to keep in mind is, there are things going on right now that may very well change. There's legislative action in the council right now to change the stakeholder definition, so the supposed Starbucks stakeholder is set aside. So,
well, in fact, city council approved it.
yeah, right, exactly.
So, we're in the middle of elections and they switched this up.
So I really think,
You can create.
unless you wanted to, at some point consider just wiping out the dedicated seats, period. I think, frankly, we're more representative than the vast majority of neighborhood councils are in terms of having.
Well, you can establish a stakeholder position, but it doesn't mean that stakeholder position can ever be filled. You can't go out and drag people in and make them run. You can offer it, you can ask, you can recruit, but if a person does not want to run, and I'll give you an example, Mr. Kuzma, you've been coming to our meetings for close to a year and a half now. You've made all these here complaints and everything. How about you running? You didn't run. You didn't want to run. Why is that? Yet you come to all the meetings. You come to the North meeting. You come to our meetings in the South. You go to the residence group meetings. You show up at everything. Why not? But you know what? We can't make you do it. You do it what you want to do. So how are you think we could actually go out and fill a seat, create a seat, and then fill it? It's impossible.
Well,
Can I answer the question, because you're misreading the recommendation?
okay, I'm gonna let I speak because
Okay, when it says position, it's not talking about board position, it's talking about the position of a stakeholder who might have a different idea on something than what you support. In other words, the bylaws say to seek out lightly represented groups to entertain lively debate. And so you guys all know, it's no secret, I'm against this RFA. There's a lot of other people out there against the RFA, and the neighborhood council didn't do anything to seek out somebody who might be opposed before they recommend that the city planning commission adopt the community plan with the RFA.
well, let's just,
I get it. The point is
yeah.
and again, here's the thing. It can be a better council, okay?
Anything
And
can be made
if we do our,
Anything.
if we do our outreach right, if we're the shining star, if we put out newsletters online, if we get the emails out, if we get the agendas
Again,
posted,
why don't you
then the
run?
stakeholders,
Enough.
then the stakeholders will know what's going on so that they can come. In other words, that's seeking out. That's what this is addressing, not
Okay,
a
we're
board
seeking
position.
you out.
Well,
Why
but
don't you run instead of complaining?
wait, it's irrelevant at this point. The point is that the bylaws, when they're referring to that, are referring to the specialty positions. I mean, that's what the
Yeah.
that's what the bylaws intend is.
Okay.
It doesn't speak to opinions, it speaks to positions on the council.
And that's my point, that, you
Yeah.
know, you can argue whether or not the proper outreach was done a year ago before the public hearing. And, you know, I think that a lot of people would argue that there was a lot of outreach. But the specialty positions are what are referred to.
Okay, again, I'm not sitting here with the grievance and the bylaws in front of me, so I'm going to let you guys just go ahead and finish so you can get done.
All right.
Number 23, we were on.
No,
Yeah.
we just,
My recommendation is that we don't adopt this recommendation, because I think there's a basic misunderstanding here of what a stakeholder position is.
I mean, obviously, Mr. Griezmann explained what his grievance, what the intent of it was, which is opposite of what that wording is in the bylaws, so I agree.
24.
24. The recommendation is, the committee found the language of the bylaws to be vague. The language of the bylaws states there is need for monthly reports to be given to the board on its outreach efforts for the month. It doesn't state that there needs to be a monthly meeting. My recommendation is refer this to the bylaws committee. Is that agreed?
Okay, this is the same. This is exactly the same as
Yeah,
number
that's
14.
what I thought, yeah.
Okay.
All right, number 25. This recommendation is, that the committee's recommendation is that the board set out a simple, easy to understand goal so progress can be tracked for this bylaw. This goal needs to be given to the officers of the council consistently each month so they can make the right decisions to increase communication and outreach. And again, although this is a little vague, I think that we could refer this to the bylaws committee. We have,
Outreach.
I'm sorry, outreach committee. We have discussed on a number of occasions trying to put together some goals or some metrics to outreach. I mean, that's been something we've discussed in the past. You know,
You need to pay the audit bureau circulation an awful lot of money for them to find that out for you.
yeah.
And
Well, but I mean,
that's where it falls apart. That's
you know, there are some metrics that you can measure, and for instance, you know, we had 3 outreach events this fall. And as a result of those outreach events, we were able to gain over 150 names into our database. That's a metric that you can measure, all right? You can say, this outreach event was more successful than this outreach event did us no good at all. And it you know, it can tell you over a period of time. I wouldn't say that you kick an outreach event off the list because you only got 3 names one time. It may be that you weren't staffed properly, or that, you know, something got screwed up.
It rained.
Yeah, but I mean,
It could be
if
a
you
holiday
get a pattern over 3 or 4 years, and you find you've been doing this outreach event time after time after time, and it hasn't borne any fruit, well, then that's a different story. So I do think that there are some metrics that the outreach committee could discuss in terms of, you know, here's what our expectation is for this event. In you know, what that means in whole numbers. It might simply mean that, you know, I talked to 6 people and they were all aware of the neighborhood council already. That's a metric, you know? So I'd like to just refer to this outreach and see what they can come up with in terms of putting something together as far as observable metrics.
Same for 26?
Yes.
It's essentially the same issue.
Right. Any objection to that? Give that outreach and the building. Okay, 28? Sorry. 27,
They agree with the board.
yeah. 28. Committee believes that the council's decision to dismiss this grievance is wrongful. And the reply to Mr. Kuzma's state is there is no requirement to establish standing rules is a false statement as stated in the Dunn resolution. Again, I don't believe the grievance committee has the authority to overturn a decision. You know, we have a bylaws and rules committee. The only point is that we're not required to establish any standing rules. We're free to do that if we wish, but there's no requirement.
Why don't we let this one be one that's going to be overtaken by events, as we've just agreed, we want to make some standing rules.
Right.
And there we've got some standing rules.
Well, why don't we just say to this at the end, however, we are not precluded from establishing standing rules if we so desire.
Yeah.
Sure. Advice of council. 30.
Yeah, I'm still making notes.
I'm sure Mr. Fewer and Ms. Leslie can have a long discussion about it. We don't know.
All right, well,
31's polite.
29, we're agreed, we're gonna dismiss that based on advice of council.
Yeah.
All right, 30?
What do we say, we're not accepting that recommendation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Based on advice of council.
I completely concur with them, actually.
The recommendation on 30 is that the committee asks that the board adhere to the bylaws and requests made in the DA letter sent to the board on 10/21/13. I think we've already cured that through the
Yeah.
training process. My advice here, or recommendation is, we've already had the training. I think a lot of misconceptions were cleared up there, and I believe that was of value to the board. And
Certainly.
we can simply say that that's been taken care of through that training. You agree to that?
Yeah.
And the rest.
31, while the committee will not overrule the dismissal, it's suggested that the council understand the importance of allowing the public to speak on any agenda item before a vote takes place.
No, agreed. We agree with
That's
that.
implying that we don't.
We don't, yeah.
So this is.
Yeah,
You know what, you're all full of, what's implied and what's secretly meant, okay? We are, we don't need to thrash this to death, you know what? The GHSNC should understand the importance of allowing the public to speak on any agenda item for the vote is to take place. Yes, we do, we agree with that.
Yeah.
yeah, I don't have a problem with.
And we've always understood. the
Yeah,
advice.
I don't have a problem with just saying, yeah, we recognize the importance of that. Again,
Well, I think your final sentence in the 31 language. The board understands the importance of allowing public comment on all agenda items, and thanks for this panel for its comments. And again, that was another one where the city attorney weighed in, so,
Yeah.
I mean, we're not gonna be litigating this.
A lot of these are just almost repeats.
well,
they
are
are.
we agreed to that then? What I put in my comments?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
fine with that.
All right.
No, that's exactly what we just said.
All right, let's go to 32. 32 is the committee asks that the board adhere to the bylaws and the requests made in the DA letter sent out. And again, I think this issue was resolved in the November 18th training session.
Exactly, asked and answered, so to speak.
It was resolved, but the PLU minutes got uploaded to the website.
I'm sorry?
It got resolved when the PLU minutes got uploaded to the website, which hadn't been complied with at the time the grievance was made.
All right, thank you. All right, so 32's been resolved. 33, the committee recommends that the board follow the Dunn resolution of 21002, section 1 in the bylaws page. And again, my comment here is to recommend that we not adopt the grievance panel's recommendation. The agenda posting locations are in conformance with current Dunn